I'm David Singh. In this presentation, I will be discussing the video game crash in 1983. The economic significance of the crash is worth talking about, as I believe that this presentation may serve as a sort of review for many microeconomic concepts we learned last semester. Concepts such as supply and demand curves and factors that affect market behavior will be covered at length in this presentation. First, an introduction. In the present day, the video game industry is a multi-billion-dollar behemoth that rivals the film and sports industries. Back in 1982, video games were just beginning to be accepted within popular culture. More than 20,000 arcades were open around the nation, and Hollywood took notice and began producing flicks like War Games and Tron that center around the new trend. In terms of home gaming, Atari started the revolution. Back then, arcades were the only viable place where people could play their favorite video games. But then Atari produced the Atari 2600, allowing people to play games right in their living room. While the console nowadays seems rudimentary, I mean the controller only had one button, with no pause button, and the graphics had to make you stretch your imagination. The 2600 still caught on like wildfire. Games like Space Invaders and Asteroids were too mindlessly addicting. People loved the thrill of playing arcade games right on their living room couch. By the early 1980s, Atari was quoted to be the fastest growing company in America, as millions of Atari 2600s came off the shelves at the local Radio Shacks. The video game industry was at its boom in 1982. Atari itself employed 10,000 employees at its headquarters that year. Just a year later, that number dwindled down to just 400. Dam had been busted open, and the boom became a bust in 1983. So, what happened? What caused Atari and the video game industry in general to become unviable? Like many recessions, the problems were visible from the beginning. There were three main reasons why the video game crash in 1983 occurred. 1. Market oversaturation of video games. 2. Loss of consumer confidence in video games due to the large presence of poor quality video games on the market. And 3. Fierce competition between gaming consoles and personal computers. In terms of market saturation, the problem came within two parts. The first part is that there were so many video games to choose from. Atari had a very lax policy surrounding who could develop and publish video games for the company. Therefore, anyone who was competent at programming could theoretically create a game for the console. Many third-party developers took advantage of this, and while some companies like Activision published many great titles, there were a lot of companies that just took advantage of the system. Companies wouldn't care about the quality of the game, instead they cared about how many games it could produce, so they pumped a lot of terrible games into stores. Do you know that even Quaker Oats had a gaming division that produced Atari 2600 games? Yeah, many corporations just shut out terrible games, knowing that their name brand would sell cartridges without any care for quality. Not only was the game title lineup bloated, but more and more companies wanted to be like Atari and publish their own gaming consoles. In our present situation, there are only three main gaming consoles: the Nintendo Switch, the PlayStation, and the Xbox. Back in 1982, you could walk into a Radio Shack and see tens of different consoles lining up the aisle. The overbloated consoles and games in the market not only made the consumer confused and intimidated, but also lowered the prices of each game. Recall that when the number of producing products of good increases when it enters the market, the supply curve shifts to the right, and if demand doesn't change, the price of that good goes down. As the price of each game and gaming console went down, it just became less profitable for the producers, since demand didn't increase either. And that was the problem. The next problem is directly related to the market saturation experienced by the video game industry. Consumers were just unsatisfied with the products they were buying, and consumer demand was just starting to dwindle. Many games were not only poor quality, but they were also derogatory, deceptive, and derivative. Consumers were repeatedly getting burned by horrible games, and they said that it was just not worth buying anymore. Here are some notable examples. One of the most famous bad games of the era was the Atari 2600 version of Pac-Man. Based off the insanely popular arcade version, the Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 was released in 1982 and received extremely negative reviews upon release. Consumers noted poor graphics and sound quality of the game, and many were turned off by how inferior the 2600 version was to the arcade version. While the game sold about selling 7 million copies, consumer confidence just began to drop. By the end of 1982, Atari's profits were down by 56%. Next came the most infamous bad game of all time, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, based off the Steven Spielberg flick. Atari bought the license to the most popular movie of the year, and they wanted the game to be published before Christmas so that they could sell the game during the holiday season. Unfortunately, Atari only gave the programmers 5 weeks of time in advance to finish the game, and so the end product was noticeably crappy. The game itself had horrendous graphics, but even worse controls and gameplay. And again, while the game sold fairly well, selling 2 million units in December, many families complained. Atari's reputation was starting to go down the drain. And so, let me relate this issue to demand in microeconomics. Remember the acronym TRIBE? You know, what affects the market demand curve. Well, in this case, changes in taste and expectations both negatively affected the demand for video games for the industry. Consumer taste changed towards negative view on video games and expectations were also low towards the industry. Therefore, the demand curve shifted left in 1982 and 1983. Because the demand curve shifted left, price and profitability also went down. Finally, we must talk about the R and the acronym for both TRIBE and IRENT. Related goods. You see, the 1980s wasn't just the advent of video gaming, but also the advent for personal computers. The Apple computer lineups, as well as the IBM, Radio Shack, and Commodore lineups, were becoming more popular. Many computers were advertised as being a smarter buy than buying a video game console, because computers can not only play games as well, but they can do many other things, such as word processing, printing, and data keeping. Computers also were technologically more powerful than consoles as well, and so the games played on the computers were advertised as being more sophisticated. By 1982 and 1983, computers became cheaper and cheaper due to the computer price war, and they therefore became equally as accessible as game consoles were. While a Commodore 64 computer may have costed $300 compared to a $70 Atari 5200 console, the Commodore 64 was viewed as a smarter investment because computers were just more useful than Atari was. Computers were not seen as a complement to game consoles, but rather a substitute. Because the price of the substitute fell, the demand of gaming consoles subsequently fell as well. All three factors concocted a mixture demise for the video game industry in Atari. By 1983, the recession was officially on. Now to recap, using supply and demand curves, at the beginning of 1982, the market for video games was at equilibrium. The market saturation continued while consumer demand stayed put. Because the retail price dropped, Atari begins to see its profit dwindle. By 1983, demand actually decreased due to a loss in consumer confidence and competition from the PC market. The supply is still increasing. This leads to disaster. So, by 1983, Atari lost $536 million. In a very famous story, Atari was reported to have dumped thousands of unsold game cartridges in the desert of New Mexico. Just couldn't keep them in the warehouses anymore. Atari eventually became defunct by 1984, beating industry opponents from $3.2 billion in sales in 1982 to just $100 million in 1985. So, how did the video game industry rebound? Well, by 1985, Nintendo took the industry by storm, releasing the Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES instantly became popular, and Nintendo Japan would dominate the gaming industry even to this day. Nintendo was also smart enough to not make the same mistakes Atari made before the crash. For example, Nintendo required a strict quota quality for any game to be published on its console. Third-party developers that did not meet the test would not get the Nintendo Seal quality, or therefore not sold directly at stores. This eliminated the market saturation problem. Market Nintendo also regained consumer confidence by releasing well-designed titles like Super Mario Bros., Metroid, and Legend of Zelda. So why is the video game crash in 1983 relevant? Well, it shows how supply and demand works in real life. It is an example of how recessions can occur in a specific industry. Also, in my opinion, it's a cool piece of history that isn't talked about a lot, and it's the 1980s. Who can ignore that? So thank you for watching my presentation. I hope you realize the economic significance of this crash, and I hope you relearn some concepts we learned in microeconomics through this video.